Assalamualaikum and very good morning to our beloved lecturer, Sir Jafalizan Makjali and fellow friends. Today we will present about appraising records for long-term utility. Definition: long-term utility or continuing utility must always end at some point. In assessing the continuing utility of records, the appraiser must ask the following questions. Do the records have a continuing use to the creating agency or its successor for its own purposes? If the records do have a continuing use, is the end of that use predictable? So, the period of continuing utility may be as short as 1 year or less, or it may be as long as 20 or 30 years. In some instances, it may be even longer. However, it is always finite. In determining the end, the appraiser will need to consider the operational, financial and legal value of the records to the agency. Records of long-term utility are likely to include records that must be preserved under any statutory provision, records documenting continuing rights or obligations of the state, the agency or third parties under national or international law, legal instruments such as land titles, leases, endowments, agreements and contracts, records relating to the formulation of legislation and policy arising from the core functions of the agency, records documenting precedent, record copies of agency publications, and personal record. In appraising records for long-term utility, control documentation should be retained as long as the related records have a continuing value. The following types of control documentation are particularly likely to have long-term value. Number 1, a copy of each version of the agency's file classification and coding scheme and disposal schedules. Number 2, file plans such as file transit sheets, file lists, and so on for series that are to be retained in whole or in part. Number 3, correspondence registers that continue to be the only or main means of reference to records that have been scheduled for retention. Number 4, indexes to any of the above. And number 5, software manuals and other systems documentation essential to the continued use of electronic records scheduled for retention. The next one is appraising records for enduring value. At any stage of their life cycle, records must be accessible to their users. Otherwise, there is little point in maintaining them. However, the purpose of which records are used and by whom may change during their life cycle. Furthermore, the use of records may often be potential rather than actual ones. Their original purpose have been served. Until relatively recently in the English-speaking archival world, the approach to the appraisal of records for enduring value has focused on assessing specific records against various categories of values. These values included the value of the records to the creators, their value for providing evidence of the origins, organization, policies, functions, procedures, and activities of the creating agency, and their value to historians as a result of the information the records contain on important events or social, political, demographic, and economic trends or on individuals. For a number of reasons, value-based appraisal did not identify the best records of enduring value. These reasons include the following. Number 1, no matter how objective or informed the archivist, it is impossible to predict all the potential users and use of records. Number 2, the quantity of records in the second half of the 20th century is too great for archivists to examine all records item by item to identify information of potential value. Number 3, the value-based approach tends to downplay the importance of the provenance of the records, for example, the organizational and functional context of their creation, in favor of the subject of the records. And number four, there is too great a potential for the interest and bias of the archivist to determine what records should be preserved on a long-term or permanent basis, to the detriment of research by those with different interests. Archivists have analyzed five key aspects of records to identify and select records of enduring value, which is functional analysis, content analysis, context analysis, use analysis, and cost-benefit analysis. For the functional analysis, the importance of the original purpose of the records, including the significance of the record's creator's function and the records themselves. Content analysis, the informational significance of records, including importance of subject represented in the records and the quality of documentation. Context analysis, the significance of the records in relation to other documentation, including consideration of duplication, uniqueness, format, scarcity, and record linkage. Use analysis, the value of records in meeting information needs and interests of the repository's clientele for past or projected use, and the accessibility of the records. And the last one, cost-benefit analysis, weighing the value of information in the records against the cost of preservation, including staff time and facilities required for accessioning, processing, conservation, and long-term storage.
I will continue with the functional appraisal definition. Functional appraisal defined as the process of assessing the enduring value of records by determining the function of the body to be documented, identifying which officers or individual created records in carrying out those functions, and selecting the records that provide most complete and concise documentation of the function. The next slide is for the purpose of functional appraisal. There are three purposes of functional appraisal, which is first, to minimize the bias of the archivist by focusing primarily on the functions and structure of agencies rather than on the records themselves. Second is to approach places the primary emphasis on the significance of the provenance and purpose of records. Last is functional appraisal helps the archivist make early decisions about the enduring value of records. As we can see, there are step-by-step overview of how functional appraisal can proceed. The first step is decide what function and activities need to be documented. It can be done by analyze the agency and program to identify significant functions and activities of the records. Step 2 is determine where within the agency records documenting the significant functions are created. It can be done by analyze the structure of agency to locate the officers and individual primarily responsible for these functions. The next step is to identify the record series created by those responsible for the significant functions. Series can be include both well-organized records and poorly organized records in backlog. For the last step is identify those records that provide complete and concise documentations of significant functions, which is the records set of minutes, paper, and internal committee records relate to the formulation of legislation and policy. Records set of report, directive, form, and manual. Last is record already identified of long-term utility to the agency. There is informational value and intrinsic value definitions. Informational value defined as the secondary value of records or archive for references and research deriving from the information contains in them and often incidental to their original purpose, while intrinsic value defined as the secondary value of records or archive by reason of their age, historical associations, physical form, or features, artistic quality or monetary value. The example of intrinsic value is an ancient papyrus document that may be valued as a rotary and parchment animal skin document with a highly decorative illumination.
Archivists. Archivists should be cautious when assessing records for their informational value, as any information can be of potential value to someone. It is important not to get sidetracked by concerns for more obscure research interests or unusual information requests, since it is not possible to keep all the records. There are three criteria for measuring information value. Number 1, the uniqueness of the information. Number 2, the form of the information and of the records. Number 3, the importance of the information to a significant number of actual or potential users. It can be difficult to appraise records for informational value when appraisal is conducted early in the life of the records. This is because informational value derives from the content of the records themselves. Early in the life of the record series, few records may exist, and informational value will not be apparent. So, it is easier to identify records of informational value where a backlog of older records exists and retrospective analysis is necessary. Last, we go to the criteria in appraising records for informational value. There are 6 criteria. Number 1, records which relate to notable events or persons and that add significantly to what is already known about them. Number 2, records that relate to major developments or trends in the political, legal, social, economic, or cultural history of the country and its neighbors. Number 3, records which relate to significant scientific, technological, ecological, or medical research and development. Number 4, records that document significant regional or local events, personalities, or conditions where these are not reflected adequately in other records. Number 5, records that are suitable for statistical and quantitative analysis for demographic, medical, social, cultural, economic history, and historical geography. Number 6, control documentation that continues to serve as a means of reference to records of enduring value or to provide a useful overview of the activities that result in records that are not themselves of enduring value. Thank you for listening. Bye.